Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again on Itamag's Friday. Very, very windy day. Let's try to hear our portion of the week. Let's get down to business. Parashat Teyzeh, which opens up with a very difficult moral question here. And I'd like to begin by mentioning something which has been on the news not too long ago, is that when Israel last summer was in battle in the operation we called Suketan, Protective Edge, I think it was called in English. Whatever it was, the Arab world and the left, the BDS, the left world and universities throughout the world came out with the most ridiculous claims against Israel, saying that Israel is a very racist country. Why? The Israeli soldiers refused to rape the Arab women in Gaza. And because of that, it's a proof that they're not normal, right? Not normal behavior. Which means, in their eyes, normal behavior is that soldiers go and rape women. But the fact that they didn't do it, it means that they hate so much the Palestinian, so-called Palestinian. Palestine does not exist in our eyes, obviously. There's only one country of Israel. But in reality, it must mean that they hate them so much, these Arab women, that they're not willing to rape them even. This is what we call anti-Semitism. It's absurd. And why couldn't they just say that Israeli soldiers are very, very moral, very ethical, right? And they obviously would not stoop down to that level of what apparently is a norm of the world, to go out and rape women during battle, which of course is not the Jewish way. But no, these people from the BDS and these, again, organizations. I mean, there was a guy I read about, an article that he actually went to campus, an Israeli soldier, and they accused him of being all these kind of things, and these are the things that he was told. Whatever it is, this is not the focus of this week's lesson, but for sure this is the topic, because we're going to battle here. This Torah talks about when the Jewish soldiers are in battle and they see a beautiful woman, and they take her captive, and they have actual relations with her. And afterwards they have to take her to their home, and for a month she cries over her parents, and then she cuts her fingernails, cuts her hair, and that whole thing. And at the end, if they want to get married, which means if the woman is willing to accept the yoke of heaven upon herself, she can convert and they can get married. The Torah allows for it. So in reality, we see the Torah seems to cope with this weakness of the human weakness of soldiers in battle, and allows, on one hand, to take a beautiful woman captive and even marry at the end, but of course with rules and boundaries. In the beginning, what happened, happened. But now you have to build the relationship properly and try to rectify this whole thing. So the Torah is obviously going in a very, very, taking a situation of a real life situation of things that happen in the battlefield, and happen when two different nations meet, and tries to rectify it by doing it properly at the end. And doesn't deny the fact that we're dealing with human beings. But still, even if we explain all that, and there are more difficult ethical challenges here, if we actually look into the laws in more detail, we see that we're dealing with not only single women, with married women even, and the woman obviously doesn't have a choice. In the beginning, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but the soldiers take that woman and have relations with her, so you can call that rape. But whatever it is, later on, it has to be done and again straightened out the proper way. Torah is trying to rectify it. But whatever it is, even in this level, that the Torah makes boundaries and tries to clean something up, it's still an ugly mess, and it's very hard to understand this whole concept, what's going on over here. And today we see how rectified our soldiers are, that these things, thank God, don't take place, right, around us, and Israeli soldiers don't fall to this level. But anyway, with all this put aside, with today's approach, I want to focus on a very interesting discourse, a very interesting commentary called the Ochaim HaKadosh, a famous Rabbi Chaim ben Attar, who lived in the 1600s. And he writes a very, very interesting explanation on this whole thing of the Eshet Yifat Torah. And his question, he opens up with a question. He says, I don't understand something. How could it be the soldiers go to battle? And we're talking about battle, we know that we want God to be with us. And when we want God to be with us, we have to behave morally correct. So how could it be that the Torah allows for these soldiers to take a woman, have relations with her, and do this thing which seems to be very immoral, when we're looking for God to give us strength and support us and bring miracles about us? So if we're going to act like just animals behave, then how can we expect Hashem to be with us and give us victory in battle? And that's the question he asks. It doesn't make sense. What does this all mean over here? And then he goes into a very, very interesting explanation of this week's portion in through esoteric teachings. And he says something extremely interesting. And we have to try to understand this. It's not easy to understand as well. But he mentions that after the sin of the first man, the Jewish souls were trapped. They got scattered and they were trapped within we call it the other side, the dark side. Now what does that mean? It means that these souls were really Jewish souls, and they really were supposed to be born Jewish. And they were supposed to fulfill the mission as Jews in the world. We're not saying of course there are 70 nations in the world, the Gentile souls, but these were Jewish souls that had to be part of their nation because they were trapped in the dark side. They couldn't be released. And he mentions that in this situation there are two ways of releasing these souls from bondage, from slavery. And how are they released? And he explains this first one is something where he brings in an amazing example. And if we look in the book of Genesis, in the story of where Dinah goes out to the city of Shechem, right here in Itamar, this area, and she goes out there to see the daughters of the land, and then the Shechem ben Hamor, Shechem the son of Hamor, rapes Dinah. And then it says that his soul cleaved to Dinah's soul. And whatever it was, we know the whole story later on. Shimon and Levi come and destroy the city. But whatever it was, Dinah was raped, and eventually, in our esoteric teachings, it's brought down something very interesting. That from Dinah, from this relationship between Dinah and Shechem ben Hamor, later on in history, a great rabbi, one of the 10 martyrs, was born. And his name was Rabbi Hanania ben Tradion. And he was born apparently from this relationship. He was a descendant. But what was the connection of Shechem ben Hamor and Dinah? And it's something very interesting that the Aliyah Kadosh, he brings down. If you look in the verse, the actual verse in Hebrew, now it's much easier to see in Hebrew, when it talks about that the land was wide, the land was, it's called in Hebrew, Chavat Yadayim, which means the land is big. And if you take that word describing, again, this whole area, talking about Dinah and the raping of Dinah, that word Rechavat in Hebrew, every one of the letters, if we take an acronym together, it spells out the name of this rabbi, Rabbi Hanania ben Tradion. So it's so interesting that he's hinted within that. So what the Or Chaim Kadosh is trying to say is something, again, beyond understanding, but his soul was trapped in the dark side. Within this individual called Shechem ben Hamor. And when he was attracted to Dinah, because really it was a soul attraction, the soul of Rabbi Hanania wanted to get out of its net and be released. And by being with Dinah, it released his soul. And later on, things were midgalgel, bounced around, that he came into the world. But if it wasn't for that relationship, which was a terrible raping of Dinah, which is a terrible tragedy, obviously, and that's what caused the entire wiping out of the city, we know. Whatever it was, at the end, it did lead to an interesting result besides this. And the interesting result was the release of this soul called Rabbi Hanania ben Tradion. Difficult to understand, but this is what it says, and I'm bringing it how it is. And that's one way of souls being released. So another way is explained by the Or Chaim Kadosh, is that certain times, we mentioned before, there are the souls we mentioned after the sin of the first man. These souls were trapped in the dark side. So sometimes you have souls that are Jewish souls that have impurities because they're trapped in the dark side, and they want to return to the house of Israel. And this is really what converts are all about. People want to convert to Judaism. They have that Jewish soul, and they're looking to find the way back. And eventually, when they marry and they convert and they marry a Jew and they convert to Judaism, so they're eventually purifying themselves and they've returned to the nation. And this is an amazing thing, because if we look in this week's portion, and he explains it if we look at the verses themselves, the verses actually testify to these facts. And how does that work? If we see that when it says in the verse that the soldier takes the captive woman, into the house, etc., and after that first intimate relationship they had, if he doesn't want her, he lets her go. Now, what does it mean he doesn't want her anymore, lets her go? So there's this goes to the first example we gave of releasing souls. In certain instances, it just takes a one-time thing the souls to join with one another, and then they free the soul that was trapped, and that's it. And that's an example of not wanting to maintain the relationship after because the soul is let free. But in the other instance, we were talking about the souls of the converts that have been tainted and want to return to the people. That's the second instance when he wants to marry this Yifat Torah. He wants to marry this woman of captivity, and she agrees to it as well. It means that she really has within her a complete Jewish soul, and it was tainted. And now that she comes back to her religion and marries a soul, she's really connected to her soulmate. And therefore, these are the souls of the converts. And that's how he explains why the other part of the Torah is saying to us that if he likes her and if she finds favor in his eyes, then she lives with him and they get married and they live happily ever after. These are the two sides of Chaim HaKadosh explained. Now, obviously, it's a very difficult thing to understand. But in reality, if you look in the Torah, this is not the only place we find these kind of things. Now, I'll give you another example, a very powerful example. In the beginning of the book of Genesis, look at the wind there, wow, it's a tornado. The book of Genesis, we see Lot. We know after the whole city of Sodom and Amorah turned upside down and destroyed, the daughters of Lot thought that there was no more people in the world anymore. And inside the cave, they both had incense with their father. It was the older daughter that began the whole process. The younger daughter did the same thing. And this crazy incestuous relationship that took place without Lot knowing what was going on brought about the birth of Moab. Who was Moab? Moab was the nation where Ruth HaMoaviyah, Ruth, the famous Ruth, one of the great grandmothers of King David, was descended from that relationship. Which means King David himself, which means Messiah himself, comes out of this crazy relationship that took place. So we do not understand this. These things seem very, very awkward and weird in our eyes. But we see how Hashem takes these difficult situations, tragic situations. Because when someone is taken away from a home and the raping, it goes on, obviously they're tragic situations. But at the end, things could be turned out for the good. In other words, we see that a lot of times things on the outside look very, very bad, and we don't understand them. We have to prevent them from happening. It doesn't go ahead, God forbid, and justify bad behavior, God forbid. But if it happened already, then we have to look and say, wait a second, something happened already. How can we rectify that situation? And how can we see maybe God, through a strange way, is sending a blessing through this bad thing that happened? At least there'll be a special blessing coming through with it. And sometimes we can even explain this as saying, why does it happen in these crazy ways? Because sometimes the evil forces out there don't allow it to happen in the good way. Sometimes what happens in a very, very bad way, it sort of disguises itself from the evil forces and is able to go through with it and happen. That's another very interesting concept. But in reality, we have to realize and sometimes say to ourselves, wow. Just like King Solomon said, to try to understand the red heifer, he said, it's beyond our understanding. Here, it's not on the level of a red heifer, because we see that, of course, the Torah is also in a simple understanding, is dealing with soldiers in the battlefield and human nature. But on the other hand, we see at the end, there's a whole constant goal of the Torah is to rectify. So we see even if it began in a physical pleasure, desire between the soldier and this woman, but on the other hand, the Torah does its best to rectify that by saying, okay, now you did what you did, wait it out and see if you really like her, try to marry her, see if she wants to accept Torah, see if you have able to be, compatible, and if not, then okay, let her go. So even it's rectified, even if something happened, and I mentioned before, one of the most difficult things, it could be a married woman coming from captivity from another nation, that could be a terrible thing, destroying her family. So here also, you can say the Torah, there's a terrible thing happened, but if she wants to go back, she's allowed to go back. She doesn't have to accept the yoke of heaven. All she has to do is accept, let's say that she believes, in the 7 laws of Noachide. Now, the Noachide laws are all laws of basically moral laws. None of the Noachide laws require a large part on part of the nations. The Noachide laws basically state to accept the belief in one God in the world, not to murder, not to steal, not to commit sexual offenses, not to eat an animal while it's still alive, to set up a court system. These laws are these are all moral laws that the world should not eat itself up alive. So the whole idea of the Torah is, if you don't want to join and come under the wings of heaven, because we do the opposite, we usually push away converts, but we do want to rectify the world and say, okay, go back home to your family now. A war is a war, now it's over, go back home. But make sure you bring a message of Torah to your family. Try to rectify your ways. So that really is the direction the Torah is trying to push. But it's not sort of trying to hush over and cover over human nature that can take place, and these things happen in battle. But on a much deeper level, to summarize things, we see that sometimes there's attraction between two people. Here, they don't know why. What is causing that attraction? Especially here when it's a pagan woman over here, attracted to this Jewish soldier who goes to battle, a righteous soldier in battle, and he's fighting these nations. But what's this attraction all about? So in a deep understanding, if the attraction does take place, it could very well mean, on the deep side, that there's something that's coming out of it, just like King David, the Messiah came, and something will come out maybe out of this. We're releasing some kind of trapped soul. Something here is being released, and that's really what what the Ochaim HaKadosh is saying here. By doing this, the Torah is actually allowing release of someone in slavery, a slave soul. And that's really the job of this whole thing. Let us release those souls that are trapped. Of course, we pray they can release them in better ways, not, God forbid, through these kind of ways. But sometimes when it already happens, then you realize, wow, it happened for a reason, because it already happened. But also we look at the concept of a convert. When a convert wants to return and flies away back to Judaism, so that convert is doing it on its own, is actually decided it wants to leave paganism and join the house of Israel. In that situation, obviously, the soul itself has enough power to release itself by connecting and finding its way back. Now why? Again, I mentioned before, and we'll end with this. We're talking about Jewish souls. Jewish souls have to return to the house of Israel because that's where they came from. And that's where they feel in bondage, that they will not be satisfied. They will not rest until they return home. And that is what causes and brings about these crazy situations. Like, anyway, just let me get out of there. Just let me get out of my bondage. Help us get away. That's exactly what these souls are screaming and yelling. Help us! But anyway, this is a very difficult topic. I hope I did some justice to it. But if I didn't, don't blame me. I'm just passing down what I received from others. The Torah is beautiful. The Ochaim HaKadosh is amazing. But we're just so small, sometimes we can't understand all these things. But let God bless us with a lot more understanding and a lot more growth in Torah. Have a wonderful Shabbat. Miss you and love you all. Shabbat Shalom. Besorot Tovot. Yeshuot v'nechamot.